Hello, everyone, and we're glad you can attend Attitude's weekly ADHD Experts webinar. We hope that everyone is staying safe and staying well as we approach summer. A few notes before we get started. If you've listened to one of our webinars before, you know we offer attendees a certificate of attendance. When the webinar ends, a post-event survey will pop up. It will list 3 questions about the quality of the webinar, followed by 3 questions titled Required for Certificate. If you would like a certificate of attendance emailed to you, you should answer those 3 questions. If you don't want a certificate, then obviously don't bother. So the last 6 months have been challenging enough for many children, learning at home, missing friends, staying indoors. Now that summer is here, your children are ready to bust out and have some fun. But how is learning and family fun going to compete with iPads, TVs, and computers? The unstructured days of summer make it hard to balance your child's academics and free time. Competing with the newest tech games and digital platforms seems impossible, but there are lots of tips and strategies you can use to focus and engage your child throughout summer. Ann Dolin is here to give us her ideas about how to best structure the summer break. Ann has more than 25 years of teaching and tutoring experience. A former Fairfax County public school teacher, she founded Educational Connections, a tutoring and test prep company that has grown to employ 200 tutors and work with more than 10,000 students in the Washington, D.C. area. Her new book, Getting Past Procrastination, How to Get Your Kids Organized, Focused, and Motivated Without Being the Bad Guy, is a go-to guide for parents. You can ask questions of Ann during her presentation, and we will try to get to as many of them as we can after she finishes. If you want to download the slides of this webinar, click the drop-down menu labeled Event Resources on the bottom left of your screen. If you do not see the Event Resources tab, then you need to refresh the page. So with all that housekeeping being done, welcome, Ann, and glad you're here.
Thank you so much for having me, Wayne. It is great to be here at Attitude. You know, you're right. The last few months have been especially challenging for all parents, but especially those of ADHD kids. And I've talked to parents through webinars like this, but also parents that call our office looking for help for their kids. And I would say that they definitely have 3 things in common. And the first one is that most every parent thinks they're doing a bad job at this. They're concerned that their kids are so far behind, they're never going to catch up, and that they're not being a good parent. And I'm here to tell you that is not true at all. We're all doing the best we can. And because you're here on this webinar today, it means that you care deeply for your kids. The other thing I'm hearing is actually true, that parents are worried their kids have lost ground over the last 3 months. So unless your student is in a school district that has rolled out online instruction in a fabulous way, which most haven't, it is true that they may have lost ground. We know from lots of research over the last 20 years that kids do lose progress over the summer months if they do nothing. Research shows that if kids aren't engaged in reading or writing, they lose about 2.5 months of progress in language arts. But it really is more significant in math, where kids can lose up to 3 months of progress. So in many ways, our kids have lost their momentum these last 3 months. And now we're staring ahead at summer for another 3 months. And you add 3 and 3 and you get the COVID slide. It's 6 months that our kids can be disengaged from learning. So that's what I'm here to share with you today. I want to help you negate the COVID slide. So as Wayne mentioned, I'll talk for about 35, 40 minutes and then open it up for a Q&A. If for some reason I don't get to your question, feel free to email me at any time. I'm always accessible over email, and my email is ann@ectutoring.com. And also, I put together an ebook with a lot of the information we're going to talk about today and some additional resources for you. And you can get it very easily. All you need to do is text 55444, and in the message block, type in summer, and it will be delivered to your inbox. So it's 55444, and then type in summer. All right, so let's get going. You know, when I think of summer, I think of lots of different things, but this year I'm thinking about it differently. And in fact, I've kind of in my mind broken it down into two parts. One is activities, and these are things that kids typically do. For example, they go to camp, or they play summer soccer, or they even build a fort in the backyard. Those are activities. But then I also think of the learning component so that we can negate that summer slide. And those would be things like practicing math, reading a book, or working on writing. And it used to be that in past years, if our kids just did activities and maybe they read a book along the way, it was really okay. But this year is going to be different. I believe that our kids cannot afford to go another 3 months without doing any learning. So that's what I want to primarily talk about today, is how we can incorporate that into these summer months. But let's backtrack a little bit and first start with activities, because these are really important too. And activities are things that we sign our kids up for, or that they do on their own, and they're things that they want to do. But a lot of times our kids aren't always forthcoming about what they're interested in doing over the summer. So here's an idea that can help you kind of open the floodgates into discussion about this. I used to do this with my own kids when they were young, and it had been quite a few years. So now they're 22 and 18. My youngest son is just graduating from high school this Friday. And a couple of weeks ago, we were all together, including my older son's girlfriend. And I said, let's do that summer brainstorm Post-it note activity we used to do when you were little. And they're like, all right, you know, at first they weren't too excited about it, but then it turned out to be awesome. And we all just started talking about what we wanted this summer to look like. And so I asked them two questions. What do you want to do this summer? And what are you interested in learning or doing? And each person got a stack of Post-it notes and a pen. And I had this big whiteboard that I divided into sections with our names on it. And I set the timer for 4 minutes, and we all just furiously wrote all the things we wanted to do this summer, we wanted to accomplish. So here's how it turned out. My older son's girlfriend, Renee, said that she wanted to complete all the activities and any additional extra credit in a summer course she was taking. Will, my oldest son, said he wanted to learn to weld and make a lamp. Ethan said he wanted to research and then camp at Spruce Knob. I said I wanted to continue to study for my boating license. Other examples of parents that have done this with younger kids have said things like, one mom said to me, I did this with my kids, and for like a year, my daughter had been begging me for a dog. And I said, you know what, let's consider a hamster. And they agreed on that. And so her daughter wrote, I want to research and create a budget for purchasing a hamster this summer. Another girl said, I want to build a garden. A boy said he wanted to create an outdoor mural from wood slabs and paint his favorite basketball players on it. So again, this is how you get started in just opening the dialogue for talking to kids about how they want to fill their time this summer. All right, so let's move on to learning. You know, we can think of learning in a couple of ways too. One is traditional pencil and paper, the good old-fashioned way. And this is really great for younger kids or for parents that want to be more involved. We can also think of learning as letting software do the teaching. So this would be with apps and websites. And then lastly, if we are really struggling with our kids to get them to do anything, we could think of learning as having someone else do the heavy lifting so that we're not as engaged in fighting battles with our kids. So it could be that you find a high school student down the street, or maybe there's a college student, or you want to hire a professional who specializes in ADHD to work with your child this summer on the skills they need to go into the fall really prepared. We have a program specifically for this. It's called Rise and Shine, meaning you're going to rise into the new grade and really shine. And that's what we want for all of our kids, that they are able to negate this COVID slide and go in feeling super confident. So what does that look like? Well, for reading, when we think of the traditional ways, we often think of, hard copy books, which is perfectly fine. But also audiobooks are just as acceptable. And in fact, there's research that shows that when kids listen to a book and ideally. They follow along. They improve their comprehension and their fluency just as much as if they read it independently. I also think graphic novels are great for kids. And a lot of parents I talk to say, I want my kids to read regular books, not just graphic novels. But really the key this summer is to get our kids reading. So it doesn't honestly matter what they read as long as they're engaged. So the key is to find something that your child will enjoy reading. And I found Amazon to be super helpful with this. You can query pretty much any type of book with their search engine. For example, let's say you want to find a book for your daughter who's in middle school who loves horses. You can type in books for middle schoolers about horses, and it will come up with titles that fit her interest. So let's say you pick a topic or a book that your child wants to read. How do you actually get them to do it? Because it could be that if you say, go up and read a book, you walk up to your child's room a half hour later and they're playing with Legos. They're not reading. So if you want to be involved, and this would be the traditional way, you could read a page and they read a page out loud, or you read 2 pages and they read a page for a really reluctant reader. You could also incorporate something called DEAR time, which stands for drop everything and read. And this is a time when everybody in the house is in on the act of reading. Might just be for 20 minutes, but that's another way to get kids to buy in. But I will say, whatever you decide to do, really, really try hard not to critique your child's reading. So if they miss a word, which is super common with kids with ADHD, they'll drop word endings or they'll do a minor substitution. I wouldn't worry about it. If they completely misstate a word that has a major impact on comprehension, you could correct them. But in general, we want this to be pleasurable. So as much as possible, try not to correct them, just so they're willing to keep on reading with us. So that's reading. Let's talk about writing really quick. Writing is often really tough for kids with ADHD, and I'll tell you why. Most students with ADHD have difficulty with working memory. And working memory means keeping something in your head and then also doing something else. That's tough. It requires a lot of thinking involved. So writing has tons of working memory, because if you think about it, when you want to write something, you have to be able to say exactly what you want to say. So you have to put your thoughts down correctly. You have to have the right grammar. Your letters have to be formed well. You have to spell the word correctly. You have to use proper punctuation. There's a lot that you have to hold in your head in that working memory. So for that reason, a lot of kids with ADHD can tell you a story a mile long, but you ask them to write it down, and that's really, really difficult for them. So I found that when we work with kids, we want to make it as painless as possible, because if they think it's hard, they will not do it. So as painless as possible means finding something that they're willing to write about. And there's one resource I want to share with you. It's a YouTube page by an English high school teacher named John Spencer, and he is fabulous. He has tons of prompts to get kids writing, and we use these all the time with kids that are reluctant. I wanted to share one with you, but the video isn't going to quite work today. But you could go onto YouTube, just type in John Spencer, and at the bottom of his page, you'll see 27 writing prompts. So just click on any of those and you can get a sense of what I'm talking about. But they're super engaging for kids. It's a video that then poses a prompt to kids. So we'll help kids pick their video prompt. We let them choose, and then we'll help them put things into a graphic organizer to get going. But even if your child just writes in a diary or they write without you critiquing it, it's okay. All our goal is, just like reading, just to get them to read, is just to get them to put something down on paper. So if they're willing to scrapbook and write about it, that's fine too. Many kids will keep some type of diary or journal. That's also great. All right, so let's move on to math. I want to share with you one research I found to be fabulous, not just for math, but for pretty much every subject. And it's called Teachers Pay Teachers. Teachers Pay Teachers is an awesome resource because teachers have created their own lessons and they've uploaded them to the website. And they're not that expensive. You know, they're usually a couple of dollars. But I found that they're super, super helpful to parents because instead of you having to think of something to do, you can just print out the activities for your kids. For example, this is one of fraction centers, and these are lots of fraction ideas you can do with your kids. In elementary school, I found that kids really need to do a couple things. They need to master their facts, good enough. So they need to know their addition, subtraction, multiplication, division facts well enough. But the main thing that we want our kids to know, and especially in upper elementary school, is fractions, decimals, and percents. So if you go to Teachers Pay Teachers and you type in fractions, you can find lots of fun activities to do with kids that include cooking or creating a store, playing waitress. Those are all very fun things for kids. And then as they get older, fractions, decimals, and percents are the foundation for pre-algebra and algebra. And algebra is the foundation for every other high school math your child will ever take. So for that reason, I would really recommend kids engage in some type of math learning over the summer. I'm going to show you how to do that with online resources in just a second. All right, so when we think of older students, and we may not as parents want to be as involved as kind of like setting up a little activity center for our kids, but we want the software to do the teaching. Let me share with you a couple of resources that we've found as tutors to be super helpful for kids. One is called Scholastic's Learn at Home. And Learn at Home they have lots of different subjects, but I'd say that they're most well known for their language arts, specifically reading, because it is a book publisher's website. It used to cost money, but now it is free because of the pandemic. And you can sign your child up for an online book club where they get rewards and prizes. They can converse with authors, and then you don't have to be as involved. For writing, one of my favorite ones is No Writing, which I'm going to show you in a second. And then let me share with you some other ones for math and a more comprehensive approach as well. All right, so this is No Writing. And No Writing is a website that helps kids with writing, specifically grammar. And I like this one a lot because kids can set up a profile that's unique to them. So when they set it up for themselves, it will prompt them, what's your name? What are your siblings' names? What are your pets' names? What are your friends' names? And then it will say, what are your favorite movies? So they'll see these little thumbnails of all the top movies, and they click their 3 favorites. Then it will say, what are your favorite TV shows? They click their top 3 TV shows. What are your favorite football players? Top 3 football players, and so on. And the reason it wants to collect all this information is because all of the questions specific to grammar, like contractions in parts of speech, have either those characters' names from the movies or their TV shows, or those football players, or theirs and their pets' names and their friends' names. So just based on that, it's super engaging for kids, and kids enjoy doing it. Another resource for parents is called Brain Pop. And I like Brain Pop a lot for older kids. So this would be grades 5, 6, middle, and high school. And Brain Pop is neat because you can pick in any subject that you want to practice over the summer. So let's say you might want to learn to code. You can click on the engineering and tech tab, or maybe you are a history buff and you want to learn more about history. So this is the way it looks for the social studies units. You click on one that you're interested in, and it will show you a video, there's activities, and there's a little quiz at the end. So something like this really keeps kids engaged. And then for younger kids, they have Brain Pop Junior, which is equally as great for younger children that want to just keep on learning over the summer. Now, I love IXL.com for lots of things, but especially for math. So if you want your child to practice math over the summer and you're worried, you know what, the way they teach math now is not like I learned it, which is true. Or you'll think, I don't want that friction with my child. I would recommend IXL because it's not that expensive. It's $4.99 per subject per month, and it's adaptive, meaning that if you're practicing fractions, for example, in the software detects you're missing some and you're not quite getting it, it will go back and review that concept until you're able to master that one thing before moving on. So let's talk about what this looks like when we put it all together, when we think of activities and learning. Over the summer, as much as kids may push back, we want them to have a routine. It doesn't have to be a strict schedule like, all right, Jimmy, 7:30, you're up and out of bed. At 8 o'clock, we eat breakfast. At 8:30, you start your activities. And at 9:30, you're doing your learning. At 10:50, you're going to take a break. At 12 o'clock, we're going to have lunch. That's just not going to fly in the summer. The opposite, or not the opposite, but the flip side of a schedule is a routine. So a routine is just a general idea of when you're going to do things throughout the day. And I would say pretty much every kid I know needs a routine. Even if they say to you, I don't want a routine, they need it. A routine helps everybody understand what they're going to do throughout the day. So here's an example of just a basic one that I created, and yours is probably going to be different, but here's how it looks. So 9 o'clock, get up, take a shower. This is to say if they don't have camps scheduled or if their camps have been canceled. 10 o'clock, work on learning. Maybe they're going to do a little bit of, they're going to pick one thing or two things, math, reading, and writing. And then that's followed by their activity. Maybe they're building that garden outside or whatever it is. But we want the activity to kind of be more of a reward and the learning to come first. So I see the summer routine as morning and afternoon. Morning is when we get the heavy lifting done, the things that might be a little bit harder for kids. And then the afternoon is more free time. And I'll talk about why it should be like that in just a second. So then we have lunch, devices and screens, which we'll also talk about, free time, and then later on helping prepare dinner. And then even though kids may really resist it, having generally a bedtime is really helpful. So I think of kids in three groups. Younger than 10 years old, it's far easier for us as parents to control these types of things. Like, this is your routine. This is when you get screen time. When they're between 10 and 13, they're almost like little adults, and you can expect some pushback. And that's where there has to be more of a dialogue around it. And then we have kids over 13, where if they haven't had any routines in the past, it's going to be harder. So you would want to sit down with them and really get a sense of how they're thinking about things and discuss a give and take. So, I'll talk about that give and take in just a little bit. So when I think about the day and I think, okay, some learning should be done in the morning and then whatever else they want to do in the afternoon, the time needs to be broken down. If you've ever been on a webinar with me, you've probably heard me say this, and you're probably sick of hearing about timers, but I love them. I love timers. I think they're fabulous. I found timers to be super helpful for kids in kindergarten and kids in college, especially, the older kids get, the more helpful timers are. Timers help kids in many ways, but the two ways I see the most help is one, dealing with procrastination. So oftentimes when we're doing something fun like Instagram, and then we have to do math, kids' brains don't say to them, oh, you know what? Let's put down Instagram and then start math. That just sounds so wonderful. No, a student's brain is saying, don't start math. That's hard and difficult. It's going to be long and boring, but Instagram, it's fun. It's easy. It's passive. I just scroll and look at pictures. We have to trick our brain into thinking that the task we wanted to do isn't so hard after all. We basically have to trick our brain into thinking that it's easy to get over the hump. And we can do this a couple of ways, but one is using a timer and setting a timer for a very short period of time just to trick our brain to get started. So we might set it for 5 minutes. I call that 5 minutes of fury, or tolerable 10 for 10 minutes. The idea is that anybody can tolerate anything for just 10 minutes. So this is what my tutors and I teach kids all the time. We want to teach them the strategy. So as a parent, you can teach it to them. You can model it for them so they see you using a timer. And hopefully the idea is when they practice with you multiple times, they can start to do it on their own later on. So we'll teach kids to set it for a short period of time, say 10 minutes, and they say to themselves, I'm going to work as hard as I can, as best as I can, focus as much as I can for just 10 minutes, and then I can take a break, or I can keep on going. And typically when they get to that 10 minutes, they can keep on going. So timers help you get started. They reduce procrastination. Timers also help you break down big swaths of time into shorter periods. And this is called the Pomodoro technique. And actually there was a researcher in the 80s, an Italian, who wanted to figure out what is that sweet spot that people need to get work done. So let's say you want to get something important done. Should you expect that you focus intensely for 10 minutes? Is that sweet spot really that you can attend for a longer period of time before losing it? Maybe an hour or 2 hours. Well, what he found is that actually that sweet spot is 25 minutes. And he did this research using a good old-fashioned tomato timer because in Italian, tomato meat is pomodoro. So that's where the term Pomodoro technique came. But he found that for older students and for adults, they can really focus for 25 minutes and their motivation and their interest starts to wane. So what we teach kids is that when you're doing your homework, or even as a parent, if you have a child and you want them to do some time with reading and some time with math, consider setting the timer for 25 minutes for each, just so they have a sense of about how much time they have. If you have a younger child and 25 minutes just seems to be way too long, take their age and add 1. And that would be a good amount of time for them to get some work done. So I talked about getting this stuff done in the morning, and here's why. You know, all human beings have these stages of timing in the day, and they tell us basically when our energy and our vigilance is the highest. So we know that when we get up in the morning, we're kind of in the middle with our energy level and our interest in doing something. But as the morning progresses, we get better and better, and our energy increases. We're super vigilant, and that means that we can bat away distractions much easier than later in the day. And we're the most motivated. So that's really good until about lunchtime. And then after that, we see a very sharp and rapid decline to about 3 o'clock. And that's bad because that's when we're in this thing called a trough. And a trough is when our mood isn't so great, our energy isn't that great, actually our performance decreases. And it's in afternoons when actually kids have lower test scores than they do in mornings. There are more mistakes in surgeries in afternoons than in mornings. And it's because our vigilance just isn't there. However, as kids go through the remainder of the day, that improves and they start to recover. About 20% of the population is night owls, and they actually have a peak later on in the evening too. But for most people, really their best time of the day to get work done is in the morning. So that's why in the summer, if we want our kids to do any learning, the morning is likely going to be best. It's also going to be best if we can do it multiple times a week instead of maybe just working on math, say once a week. We also get calls from parents in August. Their kids are going back to school at the end of August. They'll call us the middle of August in panic mode. Their child hasn't done anything. And we always help them. We always do. However, I will say that if they could have gotten started a little bit earlier in the summer, it would have helped their child a bit more. And here's why. There's this thing called the forgetting curve. So the forgetting curve tells us that when kids learn something in school, on day 1, it's great. They're engaged, they're learning, but 24 hours later, they only remember half of what they learned that first day. And 7 days later, they've only remembered 10%. So that's why even doing math, 10 minutes a day for 4 days a week is going to be better than putting it all together and doing 40 minutes once a week because of the forgetting curve. So how do we get our kids to do these things? Well, ideally, we want to talk to them about it the night before. And if you can help them put it in writing, maybe it's the 2 things they're going to do before they start, that is ideal. When kids know what they're supposed to do, they're much more likely to follow through. This is an example of what a parent did for her child named Max. And this is actually from the Washington Post. It's a great article about parents that have to work from home. And she gave her son lots of choices of the things he could do. So you see on the sheet, she has 3 columns. The left are all the choices on Post-it notes of the activities or the work. And in the middle, when he decided what he was going to do, he moved it to Max is doing, that section. And then when he was finished with it, he put it on the right, which is Max has done. And that's a great, great visual for a young child. And I like this a lot because a visual is always more powerful than a verbal. It's often in one ear and out the other. This is one that I made for a student named Alex, the things he could do for language arts. So we identified 4 things, and then he could pick the 2 things that he wanted to do. And I like this approach because it wasn't me telling him. We came up with the ideas. Actually, they were really his ideas, and then he executed it. So I'd help him get started, and then he did it on his own. So when I think about this whole situation that we're in, these last 3 months of homeschooling and these coming up 3 months of summer, what I've found is that with lots of kids that I've worked with and parents I've spoken to, it doesn't seem that having lots of discipline right now works well, or tons of restrictions on screen time. Certainly, we want to have a framework. We want to have routines for screen times, but allowing kids a little bit of flexibility seems to be key. So we want to think to ourselves, what will they remember during this time? Will they remember lots of fighting with us and negativity, or will they remember it's not so bad? We're going to have to be a little bit more flexible as parents. So one strategy I want to share with you is called the blind eye strategy. And in fact, a friend of mine shared this with me, and I've used it with my younger son a number of times, and I found it to be super helpful. So here's how it goes. I'm willing to turn a blind eye with Netflix if you're willing to get up every morning at 10 o'clock and then start to work on your writing first. So it's basically an exchange. I'll turn a blind eye on the thing that it's hard for me to oversee in the first place that you want to do if you agree to do these things. And so that little give and take is important for kids. And then the reality is that many of us are working from home. So as much as we can hear all these ideas in a webinar and think, this is great, I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that, if you're also trying to get your own work done, it can be equally hard. So ideally, we want to have some type of boundary for our kids and help them to be a little bit more independent. In fact, there's lots of research about working from home. And before, nobody cared much about it. But now it's a lot. You may have seen a lot of it in the popular press. We know that to be most productive, if you have a little space of your own with a door, it's ideal. But it doesn't work to shut your 7-year-old out and say, you do your thing and I'm in here. Instead, having that visual, which again is better than a verbal, to let them know when you're available to help them and when you're not is ideal. So here's the red, yellow, green light strategy. Basically, you're going to say, if you see a piece of red construction paper on my door, that means I'm in a super important meeting and I can't talk right now. If you see yellow, that means I might be in an important meeting, but you can still come in if you need me. And then green is totally come in. I got an open door policy right now. So teaching kids that strategy and practicing with them is really helpful. If you don't have your own setup and you're just, say, working in the dining room, you can do something similar, but with red, green, and yellow Sharpies or red, green, and yellow solo cups. You might also find that you're going to work best if you have kind of like block scheduling for the adults in the house, kind of like kids have block scheduling in high school, where they have a class from say 9 to 10:30 and then a different one from 10:30 to 12. You can do the same thing with your kids so that you have responsibility for a period of time. And then if you have the luxury of another adult in the house, they take the kids for some time as well. And then as I wrap up, I wanted to touch base on screens, because this is often what really is on parents' minds. You know, how am I going to get my kid off of screens? And I would say as much as you can keep them off of screens in the morning, that's ideal, because their attention, their vigilance, all of their momentum is geared towards mornings. And screens don't take a lot of energy from kids. So that's better if they move that to the afternoon and preserve that morning time for learning, just because it's going to be a little bit harder for them. So you might say for younger kids, you have screens from 3 to 5. I talked to a mom on a webinar the other day, and she was so neat. She said, my son has been on Fortnite with these 3 other kids, and they're always together playing Fortnite. And she said, so I got together with the other moms and we said, all right, you guys, you can play Fortnite for 3 hours in total, but no screens at meals and nothing after 9. So for older kids, you know, it might be hard to enforce this. It might be hard to enforce a bedtime, but what you can focus on a little bit more is just having the agreement. I'm willing to turn a blind eye to video games at night if you're willing to get up at a certain time in the morning. And that will generally shift their bedtime schedule just a little bit. But if you're interested in learning more about screen time, I actually have a webinar coming up with panelists that are psychologists that talk more about this. It's called Changing Your Mindset from Limiting to Leveraging Screen Time this summer. And it's on my website, which is ectutoring.com. And at the very top, there's a link for a webinar series. So that's this Thursday, June 11th at 12:15. So just to wrap up in the end, as you're getting started, you want to think, all right, this summer, is my child going to do activities? Is he going to do learning, or will he do both? And once you determine what that's going to be, you want to create a routine around it. And then lastly, you want to determine your involvement. How involved is it going to be? Will I do the traditional thing with workbooks and, work with my child? Will he engage in online learning? Or will I try to outsource it so that I'm not as involved, but I want to make sure that all of these things are getting done? And again, if you would like the ebook, The COVID Slide, Keeping Reluctant Kids on Track When Summer Break is 6+ months, just text 55444 and then type in the message summer, and it will be delivered to your inbox. So Wayne, that's about all I have right now. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, that was excellent, Ann. Yes,
Thanks.
Lots of questions. One was when a lot of parents had asked, once school ends, they didn't want to start the learning aspect because the kids are so tired and worn out for a couple of weeks. Where do you come down on that? Does it have to begin right away, or?
Here's what I would say. It can wait a week or two. That's not a problem. But I would have the discussion now as to what that's going to look like. So if you wait and say, you know what, we're all just so tired, let's talk about this in 2 weeks, it's going to be really hard to corral your kids and get them to agree upon something, because they're going to want to push it off even more. So I would, even if you just started a little bit later, I would still have that dialogue now. And I might do it by setting an appointment and saying to your child, let's talk about what the summer is going to look like. How about 7:30 tonight after dinner? Because an appointment time is really great. It treats kids kind of like little adults, that you're all on this team together and you're going to sit down together and talk about it. And that's when I might do the sticky note activity, because that's actually lots of fun. And I might talk about the schedule, even if it's going to start a little bit later.
Speaking of the sticky note activity at the beginning that you discussed, with preferred activities, several parents have said, yeah, I've done that, and they've put screens on the sticky notes. So what if they're they're asking what if their, what if their preferred activity is screens? I mean, I can't tell you how many questions here have been asked about screens. So
I might preface it before you start and say nothing with screen time. So these are all things without screens. Because if you start the activity and you let them do that, it's just not a really productive dialogue, because then you're getting in an argument about it. Well, what else do you want to do? Nothing. What do you mean nothing? There has to be something else. There's not. I told you, screens. So it has to be a dialogue before you even start the activity.
Okay. Some parents have also wondered about shifting the morning. And I know you talked about the 3 stages of learning and all that and how productive it is at certain times, but several of them want to go out on bikes and hikes before it gets too hot. So they ask, have you found afternoon work can be effective if kids have already had physical activity, the exercise, which helps stimulate the brain, and the nature connection? So they're talking about shifting it to another time other than starting in the morning.
I think that's awesome. If that works in your family, I would say absolutely go for it, because there is actually lots of research that shows that when kids are engaged in even a little bit of aerobic activity before they sit down to learn, it makes them so much more attentive and vigilant and able to complete a hard task. So it's kind of like all you're doing is switching that morning time, which they might be really at their best, with them being at their best after exercise. So I think that's, an awesome idea. And if that gets your kids up and going in the morning, I think that's fabulous. I love that.
Okay. Yeah, I thought it was pretty good myself. Several kids, in terms of using timers, parents have had trouble going from doing the work and then taking a break and then transitioning back to the work. I don't know if you have any extra added tips for that, but a lot of kids, as you know, ADHD, children with ADHD have some problems with transitions. So
yes. For sure. That's definitely a hallmark of ADHD is really stopping something and starting something else and then doing it seamlessly. So for sure. So what I would do, it's kind of like that preemptive approach all over again, is before they take the break, I would talk to them. What is your break going to look like? How long is it going to be? So if we're talking about these periods of time that are, say, 25 minutes, the break doesn't need to be more than 5 minutes. And in fact, the research in that Pomodoro technique found that really the ideal amount of focus is 4 Pomodoros. So it would be like Pomodoro, break for 5 minutes, Pomodoro, break, Pomodoro, break, Pomodoro. So that's for older kids, like middle high school kids and adults. You can sustain no more than that. But the research found that really breaks were most ideal when they were about 5 minutes long. So if your kids are going to do 25 minutes each, I would talk to them before they start. What's your break going to be like? How long is your break? How will you know it's a good time for your break? And just kind of talk to them about what it's going to look like. And then after the fact, you might say, how did your break go? What did you find that worked well for you in your break? What did you find didn't work so well? And ideally having them come up with some ideas of how it worked for them is really helpful. And I like timers too for screen time. So I found that a lot of times when kids are on screens, they just kind of go into this black hole and they're oblivious to everything else. I've worked with kids that have no idea they're on YouTube for 3 hours. It just seems that the time becomes blind to them, and it just passes so quickly. So having them set a timer for a specific amount of time, you might say, how does 45 minutes sound for whatever they're playing? And have them set the timer and then just ask them, how did that feel to you? Did it feel like the time went by faster or did it go by slow? What did you do when the timer went off? Were you able to turn it off? And just like starting to notice how they're able to manage time is ideal. Because, ultimately when they go off to college, we don't want to be texting them or calling them, are you playing video games? But we want them to be able to start to manage this themselves. And it starts by noticing their own behaviors.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. Several parents have brought up that Alexa works well as a timer versus the timer which you showed. Have you had
Yeah.
any experience with that in the kids you've been teaching?
Yes, kids love Alexa. I think that's a fabulous idea. If they have that technology in their house, I would really recommend it. Their kids use that all the time. It's super helpful to them. I like also a physical timer because they see it in front of them, and Alexa tends to be more auditory, but it doesn't matter. It ultimately comes down to what they're willing to do. And if they say they want to use Alexa and they're not going to do a timer, doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
Let them use what they're going to be willing to use.
Mm-hmm. Do you believe in rewards for completing work and learning during the summer?
I do. In fact, there's a lot of research about rewards and motivation, and we know that rewards are actually really helpful to get stuff done. So if the task is easy and simple and short, the if then or when then works really well. So like, here's an example of a reward. When you get your math done, then you can go outside and ride your bike. So it's not a reward like, I'm going to give you $10, but it's just that they can do something more pleasurable. And in those cases, I think rewards are fine, and they do work. Rewards are not as positive. They don't work well when something is bigger, more complex, and over time. So one thing I've seen a lot of parents do, I live in Northern Virginia outside of DC, and it's a fairly competitive area. And it's common to see parents pay their kids for grades. So I'll give you $20 for every A you get. And that type of reward is not motivating to kids because the task of getting good grades is extremely complicated, and it's 9 weeks later. So that type of reward doesn't work. But rewards are okay, especially if they're short term and the task is easy, but they also don't strike internal motivation. So when we think of like, we want our kids to love to do math and I'm just going to reward them, there isn't research that shows that rewards equate to internal motivation, intrinsic motivation, but they can help get the job done.
Mm-hmm. You talked about some of those websites addressing writing or having kids write. This parent wants to know, the penmanship is so bad, her child's penmanship is so bad. Should she be interfering in all of that and trying to help the child, be able to write letters that are more legible? Or is this sort of a bigger thing that needs to be addressed?
If the task your child is doing is specific to good handwriting, like if they have a workbook and they're practicing handwriting, yes, it's okay to make it look, you want it to look good. You want to form the letters correctly. So in that case, handwriting is important and neatness is important. If they're writing in their diary or they're writing for spelling or they're writing for something else and it's not assessing handwriting, personally, I would leave it alone. Correcting handwriting in an ADHD child or things like spacing, or the other thing I've seen a lot of kids do over the years is they'll start writing level and then before you know it, they're like sloping off to the bottom right part of the page in the end. Right. And I found nothing good to come out of those conversations of you need to write neater or you need to leave more space between your words. It ends up over fights. So the idea is we just want our kids to get their thoughts down on paper. When they're young, we want it to be paper and pencil. But as they're older, obviously they're going to be using their computer. And that's great. And if as your kids get even older and they are still struggling with written language, which is super common, another option I can recommend is an app called Rev, R-E-V. And Rev is really helpful in that it's voice to text software and that the student, let's say they have to write a compare and contrast paper and that's really hard for them. They can dictate it into this app and they'll get back a voice to text information, which Google can do. That's not something that is really that helpful. But what Rev is really great about is if you pay for it, it's $1 a minute. There's a person on the other end that will transcribe it for you in perfect English with capitals, correct grammar, all that stuff. And then you have it in a Word document and you can edit. So for older students that are really having trouble getting started, I found Rev to be super helpful. And for about $5, it can help them write an essay.
Oh, that's neat. Yeah, I hadn't heard of that. Very neat. What about your opinion during the week of learning learning days? Parents are asking, should they be 3 days a week or 5 days a week? How? I know you might have addressed this in your presentation, but in terms of the number of days, or should it be a little bit every day?
It really depends on what you can get your child to do with the least amount of fighting. So if they're used to a schedule every day and they get up out of bed and this is what they do every day, and it's not that hard to enforce it, I would go for every day. If, it's harder for them to do 3 days a week because they're not always expecting it, then I would do 5. So it just kind of depends on your child, what you can get them to do. We know through lots of research that having something every day is better than every other day, but ultimately it really depends on what your child is willing to do. And it can be a short amount of time. It doesn't have to be long. We're talking, 20 minutes a day, not a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And also, Wayne, I'll just add, as we were talking about the reading slide and language arts, the research shows that if your child reads 4 books of grade level over the summer, that completely eliminates the language arts learning slide over the summer.
Wow.
So it could be, so it could be that, they're reading every day, or as like a soothing exercise before they go to bed, everybody is reading. That in itself is going to really help to reduce that learning slide.
Mm-hmm. You had brought up working memory on one of your slides, or perhaps you just talked about it. A couple of parents wanted to know how that might be affecting their child's learning. I didn't know if you wanted to go any little deeper into that.
Sure. So, working memory is really, I don't think we talk about it enough in education, but most kids with, I don't know if it's most, but a significant number of kids with ADHD do have working memory deficits. And that really impacts them in things like writing, as I mentioned, because they're just juggling so many things in their head. But it can also impact them in reading if the text is deep and dense and they're having to remember the characters and it's hard for them to plow through it. It often affects kids in math. So in math, when, for example, they're doing long division, they have to remember the steps and they have to do the multiplication calculation and they have to remember to put the number at the top and then multiply. And so things that require have a level of complexity where you're having to remember things at the same time are just by nature going to be harder for kids.
Mm-hmm. Several parents have asked their kids aren't morning people. I'm back to this morning afternoon thing. What and how do circadian rhythms, if my son isn't a morning person, might be more alert later in the day. So you just go with that, you think?
I think so. In fact, I was talking to a mom the other day, and she has younger kids, and she said, she's not a morning person. And so they've just kind of grown up as like in the morning, they don't do any heavy lifting. She turns on the TV, they all get ready, and it's just like a total chill time until their energy levels get up. And then they'll do something more meaningful in the afternoon. And that's just how they've ebbed and flowed as a family. So it does. I think you're right. The mom who said that knows her child really well. And if that's not going to work for your child and they're more diligent in the afternoon, then totally go for that. I'm an entrepreneur, and I know a lot of other entrepreneurs that by nature, they are entrepreneurs because they're night owls. And it's very hard for them to have a job where they have to get up at 6:30 in the morning and report to work at 8. That's just harder for them. So people that are night owls, that is a tricky thing. They're living in a world that don't have as many of them.
Right. What if my son says he's working on Brain Pop, Dreambox, etc.? How do you make sure he's actually doing that and not on other online activities? The whole idea of trust.
Right. So I might ask him, how do I know you're doing that and not on other online activities? I would pose the question to him instead of taking on the responsibility yourself and just asking him, how will I know? And if he says, well, you just have to trust me, then I would say, would it work for you if you did the learning downstairs? So a lot of times kids will want to squirrel away in their rooms and they'll say, oh yeah, I totally did that. Don't worry, Mom. I'm totally done with that. So I wouldn't go there at the beginning of the summer. I would just say, I like to know. You can either pose the question or you can take a different route and say, I just would feel more comfortable if I knew what you were doing. So for this week, how about if you do your learning stuff down here in the kitchen? So you just have a little bit of eye shot and, you just kind of know what's going on a little bit more. It's much harder to start the summer and saying, why don't you do brain pop? They run up to their room and they yell down, I'm done with brain pop. You're like, did you really do it? I mean, you can certainly check about their progress, but it might be better to start with more oversight. And then when you trust them and you see that, yeah, they really are doing that, then you can allow a little bit more freedom. It's kind of like being a teacher. At the beginning of the year, if you're a little bit more strict and you have a few more routines and structure, it makes it easier to let up. But if you start out by kind of, not having a ton of structure, it's really, really hard to rein kids in as the year goes on. And I'd say that's the same over the summer too.
Yeah. Another parent, once again, a timer actually stresses out her child. I guess feeling, looking up and seeing the time lapse or elapse. So any other suggestions beyond timers? I mean, I know they're so great for so many kids, but there are some kids for whom they don't work.
That's correct. I found that too. And I've thought a lot about this because I've seen a pretty good group of kids. Usually they're a little bit more anxious and it does stress them out. So to see the timer moving, it's not their thing. They don't like it. So there's two ways you can think about getting stuff done. One is by using a timer, and that's by time. And then the other one is by task. So task would be, for example, I'm going to do 10 spelling sentences, and then I'm going to take a break and start my math. Or I'll work on this math until I get through the first page, and then I'll take a break. So you're defining the task and not by time to get you started and to clearly define what you're going to do.
Then there's that segue over, this might be part trust, but they start out on educational sites and switch over to YouTube, and then the parent walks in and they put the previous site, click on the previous site. And I think you probably answered this before with the trust idea, and a little bit of eye shot goes a long way.
Yes, that's for sure. That's super common. It's just going to happen. It's kind of how it is. And it's okay to be a little bit flexible with that. So, I wouldn't really get too worried about it, but I would just say, like if your child's going to work for a specific amount of time, you might just want to say, remember, you only have to work on this for 20 minutes or 25 minutes, whatever it is. Do you think you're going to be able to sustain your attention for that long? Instead of saying, get off of YouTube and get back on Brain Pop. Right. It's having a little bit, which is honestly, like a lot of us, like that's our first go-to naturally. But if we take a step back and think, how can I ask my child a question about this? It usually goes better. But I would say this webinar we're doing on Thursday at 12:15 is going to address all that. And I think, this is such a big issue because our kids have been lonely for 3 months, and that is their outlet is being online. So I've seen that kids are online more than ever before. And then to say as parents, okay, we're completely shifting gears because it's summer is going to be a little bit trickier this year than in other years.
One last thing. First, lots of people, I know you have it on one of your slides, but people want to know how they can log on to that webinar. We've had a lot of people ask here. So maybe you can explain that first.
So, on the homepage of my website, which is ectutoring.com, at the top there's like a bar and it says webinar series for parents, and click on that. and then it will take you to the page and you can sign up for that. And then again, if you want more information on screen time, I do have it in the ebook, and you can get that by texting 55444 and then just type in summer, and that also has media tips too.
Okay. One last one. Hopefully this isn't too complicated. What happens if your kid is not intrinsically motivated? We all know about that. At some point, is it okay to give up and just do activities rather than learning if it is damaging the relationship with the parent?
Yes. So if you have a child that no matter what you do, you could walk on water and your child is not having it from you, it's okay just to think of the summer as activities. I wouldn't give up on learning though. I would outsource it, and I would have somebody else work with your child. And here's the key for our kids with ADHD. It has to be all about personality. If you don't have the right personality fit, it's not going to work because your child's going to be resistant. But if you can find somebody that your child wants to work with, they're motivated to work with that child, and after a few sessions they see it's kind of fun, they're going to be more likely to do it. But I think you're right in that when it's you, if you see that this is damaging your relationship, I absolutely would step back and rely on activities.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the hour is about up, Ann. It was excellent, really. So many interesting tools you provided, and of course, perspective. So thank you for being here today. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Wayne.
And thanks to all of the attendees for listening in. Please join us next Tuesday, June 16th, when Melissa Orloff will talk about relationship rehab for ADHD couples after all of us spending so much time with each other during the shutdown. It ought to be a good one. So thanks everyone for being here, and have a great day.
Bye-bye.